Hey guys, and welcome to our training video where I will show you how to play against both c6 and d5, the Caro-Kann and Scandinavian, where I share my personal experiences playing the recommendations I give in Crush sub 1800s with 1e4. And in the course, I recommend the fantasy variation with f3, which is a move I've played in thus far 31 games in the database on chess.com under my username Illingworth. I think one reason that the fantasy caused so many problems for Caro-Kann players below 2000 and often even above is that they're basically not able to get their bishop outside the pawn chain so easily. So after, say, takes and takes, we still have the g4 square covered. Now, at this point, most of my opponents play e5. If they don't play e5, you just kind of develop and just get a really dominant position in the center. For example, knight f6, e5 is something that you're quite likely to face if you are playing players like below 1800 to 2000. But if the opponent has some idea of what they're doing, they will go e5 and try to embarrass us with a queen h4 fork. So I've always played knight f3 here. My opponents do most often take the pawn. But then after bishop c4, white just gets a really strong attack. And I show a few different possibilities in the course to actually crush sub 800 with e4. But the line I faced most often in my own games was to move bishop to e6, where my opponent kind of realizing that there's going to be a lot of very fast pressure against the f7 point, tries to resolve it with exchanges. The problem with bishop e6, though, is that the black king still ends up quite exposed along this diagonal, and after castles and knight f6, I had a couple of nice wins, just very convincing wins, where I just played e5 here. My opponents played knight d5, and after knight g5, I was ready to go either knight to f7 or knight takes e6 and just completely destroy my opponents. So it's kind of fun, right, where you're able to win in 10 moves out of the opening. Of course, it's not going to happen every single time, but when I was researching the different possibilities for black, the most common below 2000 using Elite Chess Opening Explorer, I found that not many players were really getting out of the opening as black if white kind of knew what they were doing. For example, bishop g4 is a move I faced in a few games, but after bishop c4, knight to d7, c3, both my opponents actually played the move knight f6, and I remember these games were played many years ago before I'd really studied the fantasy variation deeply. And when I was sort of basically researching for my course, what I found is that actually queen b3 is just a winning move, forking the f7 and b7 pawns. In my games, I played castles and missed the opportunity. But yeah, it's a good trick to know because a lot of your opponents are going to fall for this queen b3 in different versions. So in any case, we can see that the fantasy is just like a very nice system to cause problems against the Caro-Kann. The move I face second most often, by the way, is e6, but after knight c3, I'll get this funny French where you have the move c6 and f3 thrown in. Not quite sure who that necessarily favors, but neither of my opponents, or none of my opponents have really come up with a good way of playing against it. For example, I think on bishop b4, I played queen d3 in a game and won, but actually since playing that game, I did find a system I like more that I do recommend in the Crush sub 1800s with 1e4 course, which I'm not going to give away, I'm not going to give away all my secrets, but, it's something I will be playing at some point on my chess.com games, so you can keep an eye out for that. And yeah, that basically covers my system against the Caro-Kann, but what if they play the Scandinavian? So after e5, queen d5, a system that I actually kind of first learned in 2009/2010 was this move of knight f3, where instead of attacking the queen with knight c3 automatically, we go for this setup where we go bishop e2, castles, d4, c4, knight c3. So that's why I recommend in the course, and it's something that whenever I play this, I almost always get a very nice advantage out of the opening, because most of my opponents were playing queen d8, which at the time was quite shocking to me. I thought, okay, maybe this is some freaky coincidence. But then when I looked at Elite Chess Opening Explorer, I noticed it was actually the most common move at lower levels there as well. And yeah, this up with c4, I got this in so many games I kind of lost count. But yeah, I would just go bishop e2 castles and just be much better. I remember there was one opponent I used to play raid, 2-400, 2-500-ish blitz, who would often go c5 against me. I've sort of tried a lot of different moves and kind of ultimately settled on bishop e3, just sort of letting them take and kind of, taking back and just getting a really big lead in development. By the way, this structure is quite a nice one. You could also get, in some cases, in the line I recommend, it's e4, c5 in one of the earlier videos, how a Grandmaster Beats e4, c5, which is part of this nice little series. But what if the opponent doesn't play queen d8? What if they go bishop g4 and try to be a little bit more aggressive? Well, that's something I've faced in a few games as well. After knight c6, I find that playing d4 is a little bit less effective when it is tag teaming everything against d4 like this with the fast queenside development. So I normally just castle instead, and after knight f6. Yeah, actually, I had a game where I played knight c3, but now I would probably go for d4 c4. As for what to do against long castles, okay, you can't play d4, but you do still get quite a nice position as white with correct play. But because I haven't faced it yet in a game again, I'm going to keep it as a little bit of a secret, where you can see the dangerous weapon I recommend in the Crush Sub 1800 with e4 course, if you are so inclined. I mean, to be fair, I think it's not that likely you're going to face bishop g4 and knight c6, because it's only like the third most common approach after queen d8, and you're playing knight f6 with bishop g4. So even if you just remember just this basic setup and not really anything else, you're very likely just to get a very big advantage out of the opening, as it were. So in any case, that's about all for this video. I've shown you how I've had very good results with both the fantasy variation and with the approach with knight f3 against the queen e5 Scandinavian. Actually, there is one more thing I will show before finishing. If they play knight f6, I actually recommend a fun little move order trick that you might like, because I know a lot of people find the Portuguese with d4 and bishop g4 kind of annoying to face, because it's quite a tricky kind of gambit system. So if you want to avoid it, I actually recommend the move order bishop e2 in my course, where after knight d5 and d4, you're basically going to go back to playing the system, but where you avoided these annoying bishop g4 pins that come up in some lines. So anyway, that's all for this video. I wish you luck playing these in your own games, and certainly if you want to master e4, not just, against the Caracal Scandinavian, but against all of the defenses to e4, so you can really maximize your score against players below 1800 in online games, then yeah, definitely, check out the link in the description below, where to buy the course outright or to try the free sample first and see how you like it. In any case, I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.